On December 19, 2012, Nellie Kelly's phone rang, and the phone call was from an inmate at Rikers Corrections Facility in New York. The inmate's name was Jesse James. Jesse James was calling to inform Nellie Kelly that her brother, who was also an inmate at Rikers, had just died. Her brother was 53-year-old Ronald Spear. Ronald Spear was at Rikers since September for burglary. He was, Rikers is like a holding facility where you kind of wait until you get sentenced or you get bonded out. Now, Spear was also suffering from medical conditions. One of the conditions being that he had a chronic kidney disease that requires dialysis. Now, when Jesse James called to inform her that her brother had died, she immediately thought that it had something to do with his chronic kidney disease, that they had messed up his dialysis or his medication. And Jesse informed her, no, it had nothing to do with that. They had actually beat him to death. Now, by they, I don't mean other inmates that are at Rikers. By they, I actually means that corrections officer had beat him to death. Now, mind you, Ronald Spear had just filed a lawsuit a month prior to his death, and the lawsuit was against the doctor that was in charge of his dialysis because basically they weren't doing his dialysis right. They were basically leaving the needle in his arm when they were disconnecting the machine. It was like a very bad experience for him. And when you're somebody who suffers from a medical condition, you know the type of treatment that you're supposed to receive, and he refused to receive treatment from them. He demanded that he be taken to outside medical, and by outside medical, that's just like a prison term that they use for when you are receiving treatment from any hospital or facility that is not associated with the prison. So he was demanding that he be taken to outside medical treatment, but they were refusing that to him. So he filed a lawsuit on his own with no lawyers. And once that lawsuit was filed, basically the corrections officer started threatening his life. Oh, you better watch your back and all type of stuff. Because one thing about the prison facilities, the staff members are basically running the facility like it's a mob. If you snitch, then that's when all hell breaks loose for you. So now Ronald Spear filed this lawsuit, but at the same time, he's not receiving dialysis. He has kidney disease and he's not receiving dialysis. So at the time leading up to his death, for a week, he had not received dialysis. So he was actually experiencing extreme pain. He was coughing up blood. Blood was coming in his stool, all type of things. So now when he tells them, like, hey, I need to receive medical attention right now, they basically tell him, like, instead of sending a doctor to go see about him, they send 2 corrections officers to go see about him instead of a doctor. And when this happens, he becomes frustrated and he demands to speak to the captain. And at this time, that's when things really took a turn for the worse. Now, there were 3 officers involved in the killing of inmate Ronald Spear. Now, the 3 officers involved was Anthony Torres, Officer Brian Taylor, and also Officer Brian Cole. Officer Brian Cole, he basically was the ringleader of the whole incident. Officer Brian Cole was the first point of contact that inmate Ronald Spear made when he was seeking medical attention because of his pain that he was actually having and because of the medical issues that he was having. So when he was asking to go to receive medical attention, Officer Brian Cole is the one that was like, no, you cannot receive medical attention, and basically refusing him something that should be allowed to any human being. So now, when this happens, Ronald Spear becomes agitated and he says, let me speak to a captain. And that's when Brian Cole says, like, basically, you can't speak to a captain. Now, I'm like kind of narrating this myself, but Officer Brian Cole would not let him speak to a captain. Instead, an argument ensued. And when an argument ensued, at some point in that argument, according to eyewitness statements, and one of those statements coming from the inmate that actually called his sister, Jesse James, according to witness statements, Ronald Spear actually told Officer Brian Cole, suck my you-know. And when he said that, Officer Brian Cole responded by, I should kick you for that, or I should beat you to death, right? So now after he says that, Officer Anthony Torres, and at some point a third officer appeared. Officer Brian Taylor actually pinned Ronald Spear down. Now, mind you, Ronald Spear is 53 years old. He's been in this county jail at Rikers for only a couple of months, and he has extreme medical conditions. He has kidney failure, chronic kidney disease, heart disease. He has all type of medical issues, and he actually supposed to walk with a cane. But they feel so threatened that they pin this man down and they handcuff him. But that should have been the end of the story. Y'all pinned him down, y'all handcuffed him, that should have been it. But no, that wasn't it. Officer Brian Cole actually proceeds to kick Ronald Spear in the head with his state-issued steel-toe boots. He kicks him in the side of the head. It's quoted by Officer Anthony Torres that he actually said that he kicked him as if his head was a field goal. Now, that is hard kicks with steel-toe boots in the side of your head where your temple is located. So he kicks him repeatedly. He kicks him, and then after he kicks him repeatedly, he actually picks up his head and he says, "This is what you get." He screams it in his face. "This is what you get. Remember, I did this to you." And after he said that, he let his head drop to the concrete floor. Ronald Spear died shortly after that. And when they realized the extent that this had went and the fact that they have an inmate death on their hands, they go to the captain and they fabricate a story and they say that Ronald Spear had attacked them with a cane. Now, mind you, there is no cane in sight on the crime scene. So what do? The captain actually tells them to go get a cane out of the medical facility and go plant it on the crime scene. Now, when they plant the cane on the crime scene, they all get their stories together and they tell the same story that Ronald Spear had attacked Brian Cole, and that's why they had to use excessive force. Because of all the lies that were told after this incident, after this happened, in the cover-up that ensued after this incident, justice was delayed for Ronald Spear. Ronald Spear did not get justice until 2015. That's when charges were brought against Officer Brian Cole, Officer Anthony Torres, and Officer Brian Taylor. Officer Brian Cole actually had the audacity to have a cutout of the incident on his wall in his home as if it was a trophy. Now, the two officers that held down Ronald Spear as Brian Cole beat him to death were basically sentenced to probation. Anthony Torres being one who cooperated with police and told them everything that happened, and basically said that he tried to shield the kicks with his body and all of these things. I'm glad that he actually gave a statement eventually that was correct and actually told what happened, because without that, I don't know if actually any of them would actually be charged. So I am thankful that he actually gave a statement. Officer Brian Cole, who was the officer that beat Ronald Spear to death with his steel-toe boots and punched him and all of these things, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison, which is definitely what he should get. And he said at the time of his sentencing that he's not a violent person and that he was sorry that Ronald Spear died and that he just never intended to kill him. And also the family filed suit and they actually were awarded $2.75 million for the unlawful death of Ronald Spear. So I'm so grateful, that the family did get some type of justice. It's unfortunate that they lost Ronald Spear. It's unfortunate, that his niece testified that he was like a father to her. And the sister said that he helped to raise her children. And I know that they basically lost like a big part of their family, not to any of his illnesses, but to the neglect and the mistreatment of the corrections officers that were involved. And this is just one of the stories of many that happens in prisons in America today. Corrections officers every day violate their oath, they violate the rights of inmates, and they misuse the people's trust every single day. So please like, share, follow, subscribe, all of those things. I have more stories coming, especially a story about my own life and how I was convicted to 10 years in a Florida State prison. And I just try to use my voice now that I have a voice and I'm no longer an inmate. I just try to use my voice to bring awareness to the mistreatment of inmates that are currently incarcerated, or inmates that have died due to the negligence of the Department of Corrections. It is really a big deal, and we need a major reform. This story is only to enlighten. It's only to bring more justice to the prison system, and it's for no other reasons. And I'm so glad that his family actually got the justice that they deserve.